A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. Blood and Ashes. The horse beneath Renna's thighs heaved with exhaustion, its flanks slick with foam and sweat. She urged the mare forward anyway, pressing her heels against trembling muscle. The battlefield stretched before her in grim panorama, a landscape transformed by violence into something barely recognizable as the rolling meadowland it had been just hours before. Bodies lay scattered across trampled earth like discarded grain after harvest. Some wore the crimson and silver of the Alpha King's forces, others the muted grays and blacks of the northern rebels. The distinction hardly mattered to the dead. Smoke rose in lazy spirals from burning supply wagons, carrying the acrid stench of charred wood and something far worse that Renna refused to name. She was 27 years old, a healer who had seen more than her share of death, but this carnage made her stomach twist. Not because of the gore, though there was plenty of that, because she recognized this place. 3 years ago, she had ridden through these very meadows on her way to the capital, young and hopeful and utterly ignorant of what awaited her. The messenger who had found her 2 days ago in the remote village where she now made her living had been frantic. The Alpha King needs a healer. Battle with the northern rebels. Critical injuries. Please, you must come. Renna should have refused. She had sworn 3 years ago that she would never use her gifts for royalty again. Not after what happened at the capital. Not after Calder Ironheart, Alpha King of all the shifter territories, had rejected their mate bond in front of his entire court. But the messenger had been desperate. And despite everything, Renna was still a healer. She had packed her supplies, told the village elder she would return within the week, and ridden hard through 2 nights to reach the battlefield. Now, as her mare picked its way through the devastation, Renna felt something stirred deep in her chest. A pull, subtle but insistent. The mate bond that had never truly broken, only been forced into dormancy by Calder's formal rejection. It whispered to her now, tugging at her awareness with increasing urgency. He was here. Somewhere in this mess of dying men and abandoned weapons, Calder Ironheart lay bleeding. "Move!" she commanded her horse, her voice hoarse from 2 days of hard riding. The mare obeyed, stepping carefully around a fallen banner bearing the king's wolf sigil. Wounded soldiers called out to her as she passed. "Healer, please, my leg." "Sister, help me. I'm bleeding. I can't stop the bleeding." Renna hardened her heart and rode past them all. She could feel Calder's life force dimming with each passing moment, the mate bond broadcasting his distress directly into her soul. Her Omega instincts screamed at her to find him, to protect him, to save him. It did not matter that he had chosen political alliance over true love. It did not matter that he had humiliated her before hundreds of witnesses. The bond cared nothing for wounded pride or broken hearts. The pull grew stronger as she rode north across the battlefield. Her heightened senses, sharper than any human's, caught the scent of blood beneath all the other smells. Not just any blood. His blood. Rich and earthy with an undertone of pine and winter frost. The scent of an alpha in his prime, now tainted with the copper tang of serious injury. Renna found him near the edge of the meadow, where the land rose into a small hillock crowned with ancient standing stones. The tactical part of her mind recognized it immediately as a defensive position. Somewhere Calder would have retreated to make a stand. He was propped against one of the stones, his dark brown hair matted with sweat and blood, his usually immaculate beard crusted with dirt. One hand pressed against his abdomen, where his armor had been torn open, and something had punched through leather and chainmail to reach the flesh beneath. Blood seeped between his fingers, far too much blood, staining the earth around him black. 2 guards flanked him, both injured but still standing. One Renna recognized immediately. Victor Stonewell, Calder's beta and closest advisor. The other was Tobias Greymont, commander of the king's personal guard. Both men turned at the sound of her approach, hands moving to weapons before recognition dawned. Renna Whitmore. Victor breathed, and the relief in his voice was palpable. "Moon goddess be praised, you came." She dismounted, her legs unsteady after so many hours in the saddle. Up close, the situation was worse than she had feared. Calder's skin had taken on a grayish pallor beneath its natural tan. His breathing came in shallow gasps. His eyes were closed, his body trembling with the effort of simply staying conscious. Tobias stepped forward, his expression desperate. "Can you help him? We sent for the royal physicians, but they're hours away and he's—" His voice cracked. "He's fading." Rena walked past both men without answering. She stood over Calder, studying him with a healer's dispassionate eye, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Part of her, the part that had spent 3 years nursing wounded pride and shattered dreams, wanted to turn around and leave, to let him feel a fraction of the abandonment she had experienced. But that was a small, petty part. The larger part, the one that had trained under master healers since childhood, catalogued his injuries with growing alarm. The wound in his abdomen was deep, likely perforating organs. His pulse was thread and rapid. Blood loss was severe. Without immediate intervention, he would die within the hour. "We can pay," Victor said urgently. "Gold, land, title. Name your price, Rena. Just save him." She knelt beside Calder, setting down her healer's pack. "Be quiet," she said, not unkindly. Her hands hovered over the wound, not quite touching. She could feel the damage through her omega senses, the torn flesh and ruptured organs screaming for attention. "Lady Genevieve," Victor continued, unable to help himself. "The woman he married for political alliance. She betrayed him. This was an ambush, not a fair battle. She conspired with the northern rebels, told them exactly when and where our forces would be weakest." That made Rena pause. Lady Genevieve, the high-born daughter of a powerful regional alpha. The woman Calder had chosen over his true mate. The reason for 3 years of exile and heartbreak. "She's already been taken into custody," Tobias added grimly. "Caught trying to flee with her rebel lover. She'll face the executioner's blade for this." Rena looked down at Calder's face. Even unconscious and dying, he was handsome. Strong jaw hidden beneath that full beard, high cheekbones, a nose that had been broken at least once. She remembered the first time she had seen him, 4 years ago, when she had arrived at the capital as a promising young healer. He had been inspecting new members of his court, and his amber eyes had locked with her green ones across a crowded hall. The mate bond had struck them both like lightning. She had felt it snap into place, that fundamental recognition of 2 souls meant to be joined. For one perfect moment, his expression had transformed from polite interest to stunned wonder. Then, politics had intervened. Calder needed an alliance with the Western Territories. Lady Genevieve's father controlled crucial mountain passes and had the loyalty of 5 lesser alphas. A mate bond with a common-born Omega healer offered nothing but personal happiness, and apparently that was not worth protecting. The formal rejection had happened 3 days later. Calder had stood before his assembled court and declared that while the moon goddess had chosen Rena as his mate, he could not accept the bond. The needs of his kingdom outweighed personal desire. He would marry Lady Genevieve instead, securing the Western alliance and bringing stability to his realm. Rena had fled the capital that same night, unable to bear the pitying looks and whispered gossip. She had found work in remote villages, places where no one knew her shame, and she had promised herself that she would never, ever use her healing gifts for anyone associated with Calder Ironheart again. Yet here she was, kneeling in blood-soaked earth beside the man who had broken her heart. "Why should I save him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor dropped to his knees beside her. "Because thousands will die if he doesn't survive. The kingdom will fracture without him. Regional alphas will war for territory. Common folk will be caught in the crossfire. Please, Rena. I know what he did to you was unforgivable, but this is bigger than personal grievances. Damn him for being right. Damn them all." Rena pulled supplies from her pack with sharp, angry movements. Clean cloth, herbal tinctures, a small knife. "Move back," she ordered. "Give me room to work." Both men retreated several paces. Rena placed her hands directly on Calder's wound, and for the first time in 3 years, allowed her full healing power to flow freely. Light bloomed beneath her palms, soft and golden. This was her gift, rarer than simple herb lore or surgical skill. She could channel her own life force into the injured, accelerating their natural healing to impossible speeds. The cost was exhaustion, sometimes temporary weakness, but the results were miraculous. Rena felt the damaged tissue respond to her power. Torn blood vessels began to knit back together. Perforated intestines sealed. The blade that had caused the damage, she sensed, had been pulled free before she arrived, which meant the bleeding was internal, rather than actively gushing. That was good. That gave her something to work with. The process was agonizing in its own way. She took Calder's pain into herself, experienced every screaming nerve ending, every moment of his body's desperate fight for survival. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Her breath came in harsh pants. But she did not stop, could not stop. Not once she had committed to this path. Beneath her hands, Calder's heartbeat grew stronger. His breathing deepened. Color began to return to his face, replacing that deathly pallor with something approaching normal health. And then his eyes opened. Amber met Emerald in a collision of recognition that sent shockwaves through the mate bond. For 3 years, that connection had been dormant, suppressed by Calder's rejection and Rena's distance. Now, with her hands on his body and her power flowing into him, it roared back to life with devastating force. Rena gasped as sensation flooded through her. She felt his awareness lock onto her, felt the bond between them flare brilliant and golden. His hand came up, faster than she expected, and his fingers wrapped around her wrist with desperate strength. Rena, he breathed, and her name on his lips was a benediction and a curse all at once. She yanked her hands away the moment his major organs were stable. The wound was not fully healed, would not be for days, but he would live. That was all Victor had asked for. All she had agreed to provide. "You'll survive," she said flatly, getting to her feet. Her legs wobbled. The price of channeling so much power so quickly. "Keep the wound clean. Don't shift for at least a week or you'll tear everything open again." "Wait." Calder tried to sit up, winced, and fell back against the stone. "Rena, please. We need to talk." "No," she said simply. "We don't." She turned toward her horse, but Victor stepped into her path. "My lady, please. The king will need continued care during his recovery. Will you accompany us back to the capital?" "Absolutely not." Rena moved to step around him, but the world chose that moment to tilt sideways. She had given too much, pushed herself too hard after 2 days without proper rest. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. Tobias, she realized distantly, was supporting her weight while Victor hovered anxiously nearby. "She's exhausted herself healing him," Tobias said. "She needs rest and food." "No," Rena managed to protest, but her body was no longer taking orders from her mind. Darkness crept in at the edges of her vision. The last thing she heard before consciousness slipped away was Calder's voice, rough with pain, and something that might have been longing. "Bring her with us. I owe her a debt that can never be repaid, and I will not leave her here among the dead and dying." Chapter 2. The Impossible Choice. Rena woke to the sound of horse hooves against packed earth and the rhythmic creak of wagon wheels. Her body swayed with movement, and for a disorienting moment she could not remember where she was or why everything hurt. Then memory crashed back. The battlefield, Calder bleeding out against ancient stone, her hands glowing with healing light as she poured her life force into the man who had shattered her heart 3 years ago. She opened her eyes and found herself lying in the back of a covered wagon, wrapped in thick woolen blankets that smelled of cedar and smoke. Through the opening at the rear, she could see other wagons following behind, carrying wounded soldiers and supplies. They were moving south, away from the battlefield, toward the capital. "You're awake." Victor Stonewell appeared at the wagon's entrance, his expression relieved. "We've been traveling for half a day. How do you feel?" Rena sat up slowly, taking inventory of her body. Exhausted, yes. Hungry, definitely. But otherwise intact. Where is he? She did not need to specify who. Victor understood immediately. "Calder is in the wagon ahead of us. Conscious, stable, and asking about you every hour." He paused. "He wanted to put you in his wagon, but I convinced him that would be inappropriate given your history." Rena pulled the blankets tighter around herself. She was still wearing the travel-stained clothes she had ridden in, her leather riding boots caked with dried mud and blood. "I need to leave." "To go where?" Victor asked gently. "We're a full day's ride from the nearest village, and you're in no condition to travel alone. Please, Rena, allow us to at least get you safely back to civilization." She wanted to argue, but he was right. She had depleted herself healing Calder, and attempting to ride off into unfamiliar territory in her current state would be foolish at best, fatal at worst. "Fine," she conceded. "But only until we reach the next town. Then I'm taking my horse and leaving." Victor nodded, though something in his expression suggested he did not believe it would be that simple. "There's food and water in the basket beside you. We'll stop to make camp in a few hours." He left her alone with her thoughts and a basket containing bread, dried meat, and a skin of water. Rena ate mechanically, her mind churning through everything that had happened. She had saved him. After 3 years of telling herself she never wanted to see Calder Ironheart again, she had knelt in blood-soaked earth and healed his dying body. The mate bond that should have been broken had proven itself very much alive, pulling her to him with irresistible force. And now she was trapped in a convoy heading toward the capital, the place of her greatest humiliation. The wagon jerked to a sudden stop. Rena heard raised voices outside, followed by the distinctive sound of steel being drawn from sheaths. She grabbed the edge of the wagon and pulled herself to the opening. The convoy had halted on a narrow stretch of road that wound through dense forest. Soldiers formed a defensive perimeter around the wagons, weapons drawn and ready. Victor stood near the front wagon, his posture tense. And there, climbing down from his wagon despite his injuries, was Calder. He moved carefully, one hand pressed against the bandages wrapped around his torso. But he moved. The wound that should have kept him flat on his back for days was healing with supernatural speed, testament to the power Rena had channeled into him. "What's happening?" Rena called to the nearest soldier. The man glanced back at her. "Possible ambush, my lady." "Stay in the wagon." But Rena could already sense what was coming. Her Omega instincts, attuned to pack dynamics and territorial boundaries, screamed warnings. They were being watched, hunted. A figure emerged from the tree line, then another. Within moments, 24 armed men stood visible among the shadows, all wearing the gray and black of the northern rebels. "Alpha King," one of them called out. "We heard you survived the battle. Lady Genevieve will be disappointed." Calder's voice carried across the clearing, steady despite his injuries. "Lady Genevieve is already in chains awaiting her execution. Surrender now and you'll be shown mercy. Continue this rebellion and you'll share her fate." The rebel leader laughed. "Mercy? From the king who rejects his own mate for political gain? From the ruler who cares more about alliances than the sacred bonds the moon goddess creates? You're a disgrace to all shifters, Ironheart." Rena felt those words like physical blows. Because they were true, weren't they? Calder had chosen politics over their bond, had deemed her unworthy of consideration. "You don't know what you're talking about," Calder said, and there was an edge of anger in his voice that Rena had never heard before. "Don't I? Everyone knows you rejected your true mate. Omega healer, common-born, no political value. So you married that Ice Queen Genevieve instead." The rebel spat on the ground. "How'd that work out for you? Got a knife in the gut from your political alliance. Maybe should have stuck with the mate the goddess chose." Victor stepped forward, hand on his sword. "Enough. You're outnumbered and surrounded. Stand down." The rebels did not look convinced. In fact, more were emerging from the forest, until at least 40 armed men ringed the convoy. The king's guards numbered perhaps 30, and half of those were wounded. This was going to turn into a massacre. Rena made a decision that would probably haunt her later. She climbed out of the wagon and walked toward the front of the convoy, ignoring Victor's hissed warning to get back. Every eye turned to her as she approached. She was aware of how she must look, disheveled and exhausted, her healer's clothes stained with dried blood. But she walked with her head high, shoulders back, refusing to show fear. "I'm the Omega healer he rejected," she announced, her voice carrying across the clearing. "Rena Whitmore. And yes, everything you said is true. Calder Ironheart chose a political marriage over our mate bond." Calder's expression was anguished. "Rena, don't—" "Be quiet," she said sharply. Then she turned back to the rebels. "So you're right. He made a terrible choice. But Lady Genevieve's betrayal nearly destroyed him. She conspired with your leaders to murder the Alpha King during battle. Whatever his faults, do you really want to finish what that traitor started?" The rebel leader frowned, clearly not expecting this. "Why would you defend him? He threw you away." "I'm not defending him," Rena said. "I'm defending the thousands of common folk who will suffer if this kingdom falls into civil war. I'm defending the healers who will be overwhelmed with wounded and dying. I'm defending the children who will go hungry when trade routes collapse and farms are burned." She met the rebel's eyes. "I have every reason to hate Calder Ironheart. But I'm a healer. I don't have the luxury of personal grudges when lives are at stake." Silence stretched across the clearing. Rena could feel the mate bond humming between her and Calder, could sense his turbulent emotions even without looking at him. Shock, guilt, something that might have been hope. What Lady Genevieve did was unforgivable, Rena continued. She betrayed not just her mate, but every shifter who believes in honor and loyalty. Are you going to let her manipulation continue even after her arrest? Or are you going to stand down and let justice be served properly? The rebel leader exchanged glances with his companions. Finally, he lowered his weapon. We'll withdraw. But only because you spoke for the common folk, healer, not for him. The rebels melted back into the forest as quickly as they had appeared. Victor immediately ordered the convoy to move, faster now, wanting to put distance between them and any remaining threats. Rena turned to walk back to her wagon and found Calder standing directly in her path. Up close, she could see the strain the confrontation had put on him. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and he was breathing harder than normal. He should have been resting, not standing here arguing with rebels. Thank you, he said quietly. You didn't have to do that. I did it for the soldiers, Rena replied coldly. Not for you. I know. His amber eyes searched her face. But can we please talk? I need to explain. Explain what? How you decided I wasn't valuable to your kingdom? How you publicly humiliated me in front of your entire court? How you married another woman 3 days after our mate bond formed? Her voice shook despite her efforts to keep it steady. There's nothing to explain, Calder. You made your choice very clear. There were reasons, he said desperately. Things you don't understand. Political pressures, prophecies. Prophecies? Rena laughed bitterly. Is that the excuse you're using now? Did some seer tell you to break my heart? Yes, he said flatly. She did. That stopped Rena cold. Before she could respond, Victor appeared at Calder's elbow. Your Majesty, you need to rest. You're going to reopen your wounds. Calder ignored him, his attention fixed on Rena. The royal seer had a vision. She said if I completed our mate bond at that time, war would consume the kingdom. Hundreds of thousands would die. I had to choose between my personal happiness and my duty to my people. Rena stared at him. You're telling me you rejected our bond because of a prophecy? I'm telling you, I made an impossible choice. And not a single day has passed in the last 3 years when I haven't regretted it. His hand reached toward her, then dropped. I should have told you, should have explained. But I was trying to protect you from being targeted by those who opposed our bond. I thought if I made the rejection public and cruel, you'd be safe from political machinations. Safe? Rena's voice rose. I fled the capital in shame. I've spent 3 years hiding in remote villages, because I couldn't face anyone who knew what happened. How was any of that keeping me safe? I know. I failed you in every way that mattered. Calder swayed slightly, and Victor moved to support him. But I never stopped thinking about you. Never stopped hoping that somehow, someday, I could make this right. You can't, Rena said. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. She turned and walked back to her wagon, leaving Calder standing in the middle of the road with Victor's hand on his shoulder and defeat written across his face. Inside the wagon, Rena wrapped herself in blankets and tried to calm her racing heart. A prophecy. He claimed he rejected their bond because of a prophecy. Was that supposed to make it better? Was she supposed to forgive him because he had thrown her away for the greater good? The worst part was that she could see the logic. If the choice truly had been between their happiness and the lives of thousands, what else could an Alpha King do? But he should have trusted her with the truth. Should have given her the chance to face that impossible decision together instead of making it alone and leaving her to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. The convoy traveled through the afternoon and into evening before making camp. Rena stayed in her wagon, declining offers of food and company. She needed time alone to process everything that had happened. But solitude proved impossible to maintain. As darkness fell, Tobias Greymont appeared at her wagon. Lady Rena, the king requests your presence, just for a moment. Tell him I'm resting. He suspected you'd say that. Tobias looked uncomfortable. He asked me to tell you that Lady Genevieve's confession has been formally recorded. He thought you might want to hear what she said. That got Rena's attention. She climbed out of the wagon and followed Tobias through the camp. Soldiers nodded respectfully as she passed, which was strange. She was nobody important, just a healer who happened to be caught up in royal drama. But then she remembered her speech to the rebels. Maybe word had spread about the Omega who defended the king, despite having every reason not to. Calder's tent was larger than the others, but still military sparse. He sat on a camp stool near a brazier, illuminated by firelight. He had changed into clean clothes, and someone had helped him wash the dirt and blood from his face and beard. He looked almost like the man she remembered from 3 years ago, before everything fell apart. Victor stood beside him, along with 2 scribes who carried leather-bound journals. "Thank you for coming," Calder said when she entered. "I know you'd rather be anywhere else." "What did Genevieve say?" Rena asked, skipping pleasantries. One of the scribes opened his journal and began to read in a formal monotone. "Lady Genevieve, daughter of Alpha Roderick of the Western Territories, confesses to conspiracy with Northern rebel forces. She states that her marriage to Alpha King Calder was a humiliation from the beginning, as he refused to consummate their bond or show her affection of any kind. She felt rejected and used, married only for her father's political influence. When rebel leader approached her with promises of freedom and genuine partnership, she agreed to provide intelligence about the king's military movements. She denies intending his death, but admits she did not warn him of the ambush." The scribe closed the journal. "She is scheduled for execution in 5 days' time, once we return to the capital." Rena absorbed this information slowly. Genevieve had felt rejected too, used for political purposes. In a twisted way, she and Rena had both been victims of Calder's choices. "I wanted you to hear this," Calder said, "because I need you to understand what my rejection cost. Not just you, but Genevieve. Me. The kingdom. I made a choice based on prophecy and duty, and it led directly to betrayal and war. I don't know if I made the right decision. I may never know, but I need you to understand that I paid for it too. That doesn't change what happened," Rena said. "No, it doesn't." Calder stood carefully, wincing as the movement pulled at his healing wound. "But maybe it explains why I've spent 3 years searching for some way to undo what I did. Why I sent messengers to every remote village looking for talented healers, hoping one of them would be you. Why I personally funded healing clinics in areas where I thought you might have gone." Rena stared at him. "You did what?" "I couldn't complete our bond, but I could make sure you were safe, protected. I had reports sent monthly about your activities. I knew you were working in the northern villages. I knew you were well regarded and respected." He took a careful step toward her. "I know it doesn't make up for what I did. Nothing could. But I never forgot you, Rena. Never stopped caring what happened to you." She did not know what to say to that. Part of her wanted to rage at him for the surveillance, for tracking her movements without permission. But another part, the traitorous part that still felt the mate bond singing between them, was touched that he had cared what became of her. "I should go," she finally said. "Wait." Calder reached into a pouch at his belt and pulled out a small wooden box. "This belongs to you. I've been carrying it for 3 years, hoping for a chance to return it." He opened the box, and Rena's breath caught. Inside was a bracelet of woven silver, set with small green stones that matched her eyes. She had made it herself when she was 16, one of her first attempts at jewelry craft. She had worn it the day she met Calder, and lost it somewhere in the capital during her hasty departure. "You kept this," she whispered. "It was all I had of you," he said simply. Rena took the box with trembling hands. The bracelet was exactly as she remembered it, slightly tarnished now, but otherwise perfect. He had kept it, for 3 years, carried it with him. She left the tent without another word, the box clutched against her chest. Chapter 3. Prisoner of Memory. 5 days of travel brought them to Iron Keep, the sprawling capital city that served as seat of power for all shifter territories. Rena watched from her wagon as stone walls rose into view, towers flying banners that snapped in the autumn wind. The last time she had seen these walls, she had been fleeing in the middle of the night with tears streaming down her face. Now she was returning as what? A healer who had saved the king's life? The rejected mate who could not quite bring herself to leave? She did not know anymore. The convoy passed through gates manned by guards who saluted as Calder's wagon rolled by. Citizens lined the streets, cheering the return of their Alpha King. Word had clearly spread about the battle, about his near death and miraculous survival. Rena kept herself hidden behind the wagon's curtains, unwilling to face the curious stares. They arrived at the royal fortress as sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. The fortress was even more imposing than Rena remembered. all dark stone and soaring architecture designed to project strength and permanence. Servants rushed out to help the wounded soldiers, to unload supplies, to attend to the king. Victor appeared at Rena's wagon. "I've had rooms prepared for you in the East Wing. They're comfortable, private. You'll have everything you need." "I'm not staying," Rena said, though even she heard the lack of conviction in her voice. "Stay tonight at least. Rest properly in a real bed. Make your decision tomorrow when you're not exhausted." Victor's expression was kind but firm. "Please, Rena. No one will force you to do anything you don't want to do." She wanted to argue, but the thought of a real bed after days of sleeping in wagons was too tempting to resist. One night, the rooms Victor led her to were indeed comfortable. A large bedchamber with windows overlooking the city, a sitting area with cushioned chairs, and a private bathing room with a copper tub. Servants had already filled the tub with hot water scented with lavender. "There are clothes in the wardrobe," Victor said. "They should fit you. Dinner will be brought up within the hour." He hesitated at the door. "Thank you for coming back. I know it can't be easy." When he left, Rena sank into the bath and let the hot water ease muscles sore from days of travel. The physical relief was immediate, but her mind would not quiet. She was back in the place of her greatest humiliation, sleeping in rooms that were undoubtedly being watched, probably by order of the king himself. She should leave. First thing in the morning, she should take her horse and ride out of this city and never look back. But the mate bond hummed in her chest, a constant reminder that Calder was somewhere in this fortress. Healing, resting, thinking about her just as she was thinking about him. The connection they shared had survived 3 years of separation and deliberate suppression. It was not going to disappear just because she wanted it to. After her bath, Rena found the wardrobe filled with simple but well-made dresses in earth tones that would suit a healer. Someone had put thought into this, making sure the clothes were practical rather than court finery. She chose a green wool dress that brought out her eyes and braided her damp hair. Dinner arrived as promised, carried by a young servant girl who set out dishes on the small table by the window. Roasted chicken, fresh bread, autumn vegetables, and mulled wine. Far better fare than Rena had eaten in months. "Is there anything else you need, my lady?" the girl asked shyly. "I'm not a lady," Rena corrected gently. "Just a healer." "You're the one who saved the king's life," the girl said. "Everyone's talking about it. They say you rode through a battlefield alone and healed him when he was dying. They say you faced down rebels who wanted to kill us all." Rena did not know what to say to that. It was nothing any healer wouldn't have done, but you did it for him. Even after, the girl trailed off, clearly aware she was treading on dangerous ground. "Even after he rejected me?" Rena supplied. "Yes, even after that." The girl left looking impressed, which was absurd. Rena had not done anything heroic. She had simply been unable to walk away from someone who needed help, even if that someone had broken her heart. She was finishing her meal when someone knocked on the door. Rena opened it to find an elderly man with silver hair pulled back in a neat queue. He wore healer's robes marked with the royal seal, and his gray eyes studied her with interest. "Rena Whitmore," he said. "I thought I recognized the name when Victor told me you'd returned. You trained under Healer Aldrich in the eastern provinces, didn't you?" Recognition sparked. "Master Finian? I didn't know you were still at court. Where else would I be? Someone has to keep the royals from killing themselves with their political games." He smiled, but there was sadness in it. "May I come in? I promise this isn't an official visit. I simply wanted to see how one of Aldrich's best students was faring." Rena stepped aside to let him enter. Finian had been a fixture at court 3 years ago, the royal physician whose knowledge of healing was legendary. He had never been unkind to her during her brief time here, but he had also not intervened when Calder rejected their bond. "I'm well," she said, which was not quite true but seemed like the appropriate response. Finian settled into one of the chairs and studied her with those keen eyes. "You saved the king's life. That was brave work, Rena. The wound was mortal. Only direct channeling could have stabilized him. I did what any healer would do." "No," Finian said quietly. "You did what very few healers could do, and fewer still would have done given your history with him." He paused. "Has anyone told you the truth about why Calder rejected your bond?" Rena's hands clenched in her lap. "He mentioned a prophecy, some vision that convinced him our bond would lead to war. It wasn't just any vision." Finian leaned forward, his expression serious. "The royal seer, Miriel, had been having the same dream for months before you arrived at court. A great war that would split the kingdom, with you and Calder at the center of it. She warned him that if he completed your mate bond at that specific time, factions opposed to his rule would use it as justification for rebellion. Why? Rena asked. What did I have to do with their rebellion? You were common-born, an Omega with no political connections. To the old guard nobles, you represented everything they feared about Calder's rule. He had been making changes, giving more voice to common shifters, reducing the power of the noble houses. They hated it. When they learned his true mate was an Omega without noble blood, they saw their chance. Finian stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the city below. Representatives from 5 different noble houses came to Calder the day after your bond formed. They told him in no uncertain terms that if he completed the bond with you, they would withdraw their support. Their armies would march on the capital. Blood would be spilled on a scale not seen in generations. Rena felt ice spreading through her chest. So he chose to keep their support instead. He chose to prevent a war that would have killed hundreds of thousands of shifters. Finian turned back to face her. Was it the right choice? I honestly don't know. But I do know that he didn't make it lightly. I was there when Miriel gave him her final prophecy. She said that if he rejected you publicly and cruelly, making it clear that the bond meant nothing to him, the nobles would be satisfied. You would be safe from their political machinations, and the kingdom would remain stable. Safe? Rena's voice shook. I fled the capital in shame. I've been hiding for 3 years. And in that time, no noble has bothered you. No political faction has tried to use you as a pawn. You've been able to live and work in peace, even if that peace came at the cost of your happiness. Finian's expression was compassionate. I'm not saying Calder was right to choose as he did. I'm saying the choice he faced was impossible. Duty to his kingdom, or duty to his mate. Both sacred, both demanding, both tearing him apart. Rena sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. Everything she thought she understood about that terrible day was shifting, reforming into new patterns. He should have told me, she said. Should have trusted me with the truth. Perhaps. But would you have accepted it? Would you have been able to stand in that throne room and let him humiliate you, knowing it was all theater designed to protect you? Finian shook his head. Your pain had to be real for the deception to work. The nobles had to believe you meant nothing to him. A knock at the door interrupted them. Victor entered without waiting for permission, his expression urgent. Master Finian, Rena. You need to come quickly. There's been an attack. They followed Victor through corridors lit by torches, their footsteps echoing on stone floors. Guards ran past them, weapons drawn. The fortress was on high alert, every soldier mobilized. Victor led them to Calder's private chambers. The doors hung open, splintered, as if something heavy had struck them. Inside, furniture was overturned, tapestries torn from walls. Signs of a violent struggle marked every surface. And in the center of the chaos, 3 bodies lay on the floor, assassins by their dark clothing and drawn weapons. All 3 were dead, killed by precise strikes that spoke of trained combat. Calder stood over them, breathing hard, dressed only in sleeping clothes with a sword in his hand. Blood seeped through the bandages wrapped around his torso. He had reopened his wound, fighting off the attackers. Tobias Greymont knelt beside one of the bodies, examining something. They're wearing the gray of the northern rebels. This was organized, not a random attack. How did they get into the fortress? Victor demanded. Someone let them in, Calder said flatly. Someone with access to my private chambers. His amber eyes found Rena's across the room, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Not suspicion, but fear. Fear for her. You're injured again, she said, moving toward him before she could think better of it. It's nothing, Calder said, but he swayed slightly as he spoke. It's not nothing. Rena pushed past guards and debris to reach him. Sit down before you fall down. For once, he obeyed without argument, sinking into a chair that had somehow remained upright during the fight. Rena pulled away his blood-soaked bandages and examined the wound beneath. Just as she feared, several of the sutures had torn open. The healing she had accomplished on the battlefield was being undone by his stubborn refusal to rest. I need supplies, she said to Finian, who had followed her into the room. Already here. The old healer produced a bag from seemingly nowhere and began laying out materials. I learned long ago to carry everything I might need in this fortress. Someone's always getting injured doing something foolish. Working together, they cleaned and restitched the torn wound. Calder remained silent throughout, though his jaw was clenched tight against pain. When they finished, Rena placed her hands directly on his abdomen and channeled healing energy into the damaged tissue. Not as much as before, just to accelerate the initial stages of recovery. The mate bond flared between them, golden and warm. In this moment, with her hands on his body and her power flowing into him, she could feel everything he felt. The physical pain of his injuries, the emotional turmoil of the attack, and beneath it all, an overwhelming sense of relief that she was here, that she was safe, that she had not been harmed. When she pulled her hands away, Calder caught her wrist gently. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Again, you need to stop getting injured," Rena replied, but there was no heat in it. "I'm not going to keep healing you if you insist on fighting assassins in your sleeping clothes." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I'll try to remember that." Victor cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, we need to discuss security. If assassins can reach your private chambers, nowhere in the fortress is safe." "I know." Calder released Rena's wrist reluctantly. "Double the guards on all entrances. Question everyone who had access to this wing tonight. Find out who helped those men get inside." "And Rena?" Tobias asked. "The rebels know she's here. They might target her next. Move her to the secured wing," Calder ordered. "Post guards outside her door. No one enters without clearance from Victor or myself." "I'm not a prisoner," Rena protested. "No," Calder agreed. "But you are under my protection, whether you want to be or not. Those men came here to kill me. If they knew you were the one who saved my life, they might come for you next." The thought had not occurred to Rena, but now that it had been voiced, the danger was obvious. She had made herself a target by healing the king. The rebels who wanted Calder dead would see her as an obstacle to their goals. "Fine," she conceded, "but I'm not staying in some windowless cell. The secured wing has perfectly nice rooms," Victor assured her. "You'll be comfortable, I promise." They escorted her to new chambers in a different part of the fortress, one with guard posts at every corner and magical wards inscribed on the doors. The rooms were indeed comfortable, though smaller than the previous ones, but they felt safer, which Rena had to admit mattered more than luxury at the moment. After everyone had left except for the 2 guards posted outside her door, Rena sat on the bed and tried to process everything that had happened. Finian's revelation about the prophecy and the noble's threats, the attack on Calder's chambers, the way he had looked at her with such relief when he realized she was unharmed. She pulled the wooden box containing her bracelet from her bag and opened it. The silver gleamed in the lamplight, green stones catching and reflecting the flame. 3 years he had carried this. 3 years of remembering her, thinking about her, regretting his choice. Maybe that did not fix what he had broken. Maybe it never could. But it meant something that he had tried. Chapter 4. Truth and Fire. Rena woke to shouting in the corridors. She bolted upright, heart hammering, as the sounds of running feet echoed beyond her door. For a confused moment she thought another attack was underway, that assassins had breached the secured wing. Then she heard Victor's voice, raised in command. "Search every room. Check the servants' quarters. Someone helped those assassins last night, and they're still in this fortress." She dressed quickly in a practical brown dress and opened her door to find the 2 guards still at their posts, though both looked tense. "What's happening?" "Investigation," one guard said. "The king ordered a full sweep of the fortress. We're looking for traitors." Rena's stomach twisted. The fortress was on edge, everyone suspicious of everyone else. This was no way to live, constantly looking over shoulders and wondering who might be working for the rebels. She found her way to the healer's wing, where Finian was organizing supplies. The old man looked up as she entered, his expression weary. "Ah, Rena. Good. I could use your help." He gestured to several wounded soldiers waiting on benches. "These men fought off yesterday's attackers. Minor wounds mostly, but they need tending." Working alongside Finian felt natural, falling into the rhythm of healing that had been Rena's life for so long. She cleaned cuts, stitched gashes, applied poultices to bruises. The soldiers were young, most of them barely into their 20s. They watched her with a mixture of curiosity and respect. "Is it true you saved the king's life on the battlefield?" one asked as she bandaged his arm. Yes, Rena said simply. Why? Another soldier blurted. Everyone knows he rejected you. Why would you help him? Rena paused, considering her answer. Because a healer's oath doesn't have exceptions for people who've wronged us. I help those who need help. That's all. The soldiers exchanged glances, clearly impressed by her answer. When they left, Finian approached with 2 cups of tea. You handled that well, he said, handing her a cup. They're good men, but young. They don't yet understand that life rarely offers simple choices. Rena sipped the tea, grateful for the warmth. Master Finian, you said last night that Calder faced an impossible choice, but he could have trusted me with the truth. Could have given me the chance to face it alongside him. Perhaps. Finian settled onto a bench. But consider what that would have meant. You would have had to stand in that throne room, knowing the rejection was theater, and still feel the pain of it. Could you have acted convincingly when every instinct screamed to reveal the truth? I don't know, Rena admitted. But at least I would have known. At least I wouldn't have spent 3 years thinking I meant nothing to him. Fair, Finian acknowledged. Though I will say this. Calder has been miserable every day since you left. He threw himself into ruling, into making changes that would benefit common shifters, almost as if he was trying to prove that your sacrifice meant something. Before Rena could respond, the door burst open and Tobias Greymont strode in, his expression grim. Rena, you need to come with me. The king requires your presence immediately. Something in his tone made her set down her tea and follow without argument. Tobias led her through corridors to a part of the fortress she had never seen before, down stone steps into what appeared to be a dungeon level. The air here was cold and damp, smelling of mold and old stone. They stopped before a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. 2 guards flanked it, and through a small barred window, Rena could see flickering torchlight within. What is this? She asked. The interrogation room, Tobias said quietly. We captured one of the assassins from last night. He's talking. He pushed open the door. Inside, Calder stood with Victor beside a table where a bloodied man sat bound to a chair. The man wore the gray clothing of the Northern rebels, but his face was unfamiliar to Rena. Calder looked up as she entered, and something complicated crossed his expression. Rena, I'm sorry to bring you here, but you need to hear this. Hear what? She approached cautiously, her healer's instincts immediately cataloging the prisoner's injuries. Bruised ribs, split lip, swollen eye. Interrogated, not tortured, but the line between them was thin. Tell her what you told us, Calder commanded the prisoner. The man spat blood onto the floor. You're wasting your time. I've already said everything I'm going to say. Then I'll repeat it, Victor said coldly. He turned to Rena. This man was part of a group hired to assassinate the king, but not by the Northern rebels. They were hired by Lady Genevieve's family, seeking revenge for her execution. Rena's breath caught. Her family? But I thought she was already in custody when the ambush happened. She was, Calder said, but her father, Alpha Roderick, didn't know about her betrayal until after the battle. When he learned what she'd done and that she was sentenced to death, he decided that if his daughter was going to die, I should die as well. Roderick controls the western mountain passes, Victor added. His support has been crucial to maintaining trade routes. If he declares open war, the economic damage alone could destabilize the kingdom. The prisoner laughed bitterly. You killed his daughter. You think he's going to let that stand? Roderick has 30 assassins positioned throughout this city, all waiting for their moment to strike. You're a dead man, Ironheart. It's only a matter of time. Calder's jaw clenched, but his voice remained steady. Did you help plan the attack? Did you give them access to my chambers? I'm not telling you anything about the inside man, the prisoner said. You can torture me all you want, but I'm not betraying my brothers. Rena felt sick. This was the reality of Calder's life as Alpha King. Constant threats, political machinations, people who wanted him dead for decisions he made trying to serve his kingdom. Get him out of here, Calder ordered, and guards dragged the prisoner away. When they were gone, Calder turned to Rena with haunted eyes. Now you see what I deal with. Every decision has consequences. Executing Genevieve was justice for her crimes, but it's turned her father into an enemy. And there are 30 more assassins in my city. Why did you want me to hear this? Rena asked. Because I need you to understand something. Calder moved closer, and despite everything, Rena's heart beat faster at his proximity. 3 years ago, when I rejected our bond, this is what I was trying to protect you from. The nobles who opposed you would have hired assassins. They would have targeted you every day of your life. You would have lived in constant fear, always looking over your shoulder, never safe. So you decided for me, Rena said. You chose fear for me instead of letting me choose for myself. Yes, Calder admitted. Because I couldn't bear the thought of you being hurt, of you living the way I live, always surrounded by guards, always one knife away from death. You deserved better than that. I deserve the truth, Rena countered. But her anger was fading, replaced by something more complicated. Understanding, perhaps. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. The door burst open again, and this time it was a guard looking panicked. Your Majesty, fire in the Eastern District, multiple buildings burning. Calder was moving before the guard finished speaking. How many buildings? At least 5, spreading fast. The wind is carrying embers. It could consume half the district if we don't stop it. Mobilize every available soldier, Calder ordered. Get water brigades organized. Evacuate the affected areas. He turned to Rena. Will you come? We'll need healers for the injured. She did not hesitate. Yes. They ran through the fortress and out into the city streets. The smell of smoke hit Rena immediately, thick and acrid. In the distance, orange flames painted the sky, and even from here she could hear people screaming. The Eastern District was chaos. Fire consumed wooden buildings, leaping from roof to roof with terrifying speed. Citizens ran in all directions, some carrying possessions, others simply fleeing the flames. Soldiers worked to form bucket brigades, passing water from the river to throw on the fires, but it was not working fast enough. Calder immediately took command, his voice carrying over the chaos. Victor, organize evacuation routes. Tobias, get people away from the flames. Finian, set up a healing station on the plaza. Rena found herself working alongside Finian and 2 other healers, treating burns and smoke inhalation as injured citizens were brought to them. A child with burns on his hands. A woman who had inhaled too much smoke. An elderly man who had fallen trying to escape. She worked without thinking, her training taking over. Channel healing energy into damaged tissue. Cool burns with salves. Clear lungs of smoke damage. Move to the next patient. Again and again and again. Through it all, she was aware of Calder coordinating the response. He was everywhere at once, helping to pull people from burning buildings, organizing the water brigades, directing soldiers. This was why he was Alpha King, Rena realized. Not because of bloodline or political power, but because when crisis struck, he was the one who stood firm and led. The fire burned for 3 hours before it was finally contained. When the last flames were extinguished, Rena looked at the devastation. 10 buildings destroyed, 20 more damaged. But thanks to the organized response, only 5 deaths and perhaps 30 serious injuries. It could have been so much worse. Calder found her in the makeshift healing station, both of them covered in soot and exhaustion. Are you all right? He asked. Tired, Rena admitted. But fine. You? Same. He looked at the burned district with bleak eyes. This wasn't an accident. Fires started in 5 different locations simultaneously. Someone set this deliberately. The assassins, Rena said, understanding. A distraction. They wanted you out of the fortress, exposed. Yes, which means they're getting desperate. Calder turned to her, and in his eyes she saw exhaustion and determination, and something that looked dangerously like hope. Rena, I know I have no right to ask this, but I need you to stay. Not just as a healer, but as... He trailed off, as if unsure how to finish. As what? Rena prompted. As my mate, he said simply. I need you to officially accept the bond and stand beside me, because this kingdom is falling apart, and I don't know if I can hold it together alone. The prophecy said completing our bond would cause war, but maybe the seer was wrong. Maybe the real danger is leaving it incomplete. Rena stared at him, speechless. After 3 years of separation, after everything that had happened, he was asking her to complete their mate bond, to become his Luna, to rule beside him. I need time, she finally said. This is too much, too fast. I understand. but disappointment flickered across his face before he could hide it. Take all the time you need. Just, please stay. Please don't leave again. Before Rena could answer, Tobias appeared with urgent news. Your Majesty, we've identified one of the arsonists. He's in custody. They followed Tobias back to the fortress, where another prisoner waited in the interrogation room. This one was younger, barely out of his teens, and his eyes widened with fear when Calder entered. I'll talk, the boy said immediately. I'll tell you everything. Just please don't execute me. Then talk, Calder said. The story that poured out confirmed their suspicions. Roderick's assassins had set the fires as a distraction, hoping to either kill Calder during the chaos, or at least weaken his position by showing he couldn't protect his own city. More attacks were planned. More fires, more assassinations. A campaign of terror designed to destabilize the kingdom. And the inside man? Victor asked. Who's helping you from within the fortress? The boy hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. I don't know his name, but he's high-ranking. Someone with access to the king's private chambers and the security schedules. He's been feeding us information for weeks. A traitor in the inner circle. Rena watched Calder's expression harden as he absorbed this information. How did you rule when you could not trust your own people? After the prisoner was removed, Calder stood silent for a long moment. Then he looked at Rena, and in his eyes, she saw the weight of every impossible choice he'd ever made. This is my life, he said quietly. Constant threats, political betrayal, never knowing who to trust, and I wanted to spare you from it. Can you understand that now? Rena thought about the fires, the assassins, the traitor hiding somewhere in the fortress. She thought about the child with burned hands and the elderly man who had almost died fleeing the flames. I understand, she said, but understanding isn't the same as agreeing with your choice. You still should have told me. I know, Calder said, and I'm sorry. For all of it. It was not forgiveness, but it was a start. Chapter 5. March into darkness. 2 weeks passed in a blur of military preparation. Calder made the decision to take the fight to the northern rebels rather than wait for more attacks on the capital. Rena watched from the fortress walls as soldiers assembled in the training yards, cavalry units practicing formations, supply wagons being loaded with provisions. She had agreed to accompany the campaign, not because Calder asked, though he had, repeatedly, but because wounded soldiers would need healers, and Finian was too old to make the journey north through rough terrain. You don't have to do this, Calder said, appearing beside her on the wall walk. He wore his armor now, dark leather reinforced with metal plates, a sword at his hip. He looked every inch the warrior king, though Rena knew the wound in his abdomen was still tender despite her repeated healings. I know, Rena replied. But those soldiers didn't choose this war. They deserve the best medical care available. And you're the best. It was not a question. Calder gazed out at his assembled forces, his expression troubled. We leave at dawn. Victor estimates a week to reach the rebel stronghold in the northern mountains. A week of traveling alongside him. A week of shared campfires and close quarters. Rena was not sure her resolve could survive that much proximity to her mate, because despite everything, despite 3 years of hurt and anger, the bond between them grew stronger every day. She felt him now, a constant presence at the edge of her awareness, could sense his moods, his worries, his carefully controlled hope that maybe, somehow, they could find their way back to each other. Calder? She began, then stopped, unsure what she wanted to say. He looked at her, amber eyes intense. Yes? Be careful out there. The rebels want you dead. Don't give them an easy target. Something flickered across his face. Disappointment that she had not said something else, perhaps. But he masked it quickly. I'll do my best. Though having you there to patch me up if things go wrong makes me feel considerably better about the odds. Don't count on it, Rena said, though there was no heat in the words. One of these days I'm going to let you bleed just to teach you a lesson about taking unnecessary risks. Fair, Calder said, and his lips quirked in what might have been a smile. The army departed at first light, 500 soldiers and support staff making their way north through forest paths that gradually gave way to rocky highland terrain. Rena rode near the middle of the column with the other healers and supply wagons, while Calder led from the front alongside Victor and Tobias. On the second night, they made camp in a clearing surrounded by ancient pines. Rena helped Finian set up the medical tent, organizing supplies and preparing for potential injuries. The old healer worked beside her in comfortable silence until he finally spoke. "You're handling this well." Being around him again. "I'm a professional," Rena said, not looking up from the bandages she was rolling. "You're in love with him." Finian countered gently. "And that makes everything harder." Rena's hand stilled. She had not spoken those words aloud, had barely acknowledged them to herself, but hearing them from Finian made them impossible to deny. "It doesn't matter what I feel," she said quietly. "Too much has happened. Too many wounds that won't heal. Wounds can heal if you let them," Finian said. "I've been a healer for 50 years, child. And the one thing I've learned is that the deepest wounds are rarely physical. They're the ones we carry in our hearts, the places where trust was broken and hope died. Those are the injuries that define us." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Calder made a terrible choice 3 years ago. He hurt you in ways that can't be undone. But he's spent every day since trying to be worthy of a second chance he knows he doesn't deserve." Finian placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. "The question isn't whether he deserves forgiveness. The question is whether you can live with the regret of never trying to rebuild what was lost." Before Rena could respond, shouts erupted from the edge of camp. She ran outside the medical tent to find soldiers forming defensive positions, weapons drawn. Through the trees, figures moved in the darkness. Calder strode past, sword already in hand. "How many?" "At least 30, Tobias reported. "Northern rebels based on their approach. They're surrounding the camp. Hold positions," Calder ordered. "Wait for them to make the first move." The rebels emerged from the tree line slowly, deliberately. They were better armed than Rena expected, carrying quality weapons and wearing leather armor. This was not a ragged band of insurgents. This was a trained military force. Their leader stepped forward, a scarred man with gray streaking his dark hair. "Alpha King Calder Ironheart. We meet at last." "I don't believe we've been introduced," Calder said, his voice carrying false pleasantry over real steel. "I am Commander Brennan of the Northern Alliance, and I'm here to offer you terms." "Terms?" Victor scoffed. "You're surrounded and outnumbered. What terms could you possibly offer?" "Not terms of surrender," Brennan said. "Terms of combat. Single combat between your king and our champion. Winner takes all. Your army withdraws, or ours does. No more bloodshed, no more burned cities. Just 2 warriors settling this honorably." Rena felt cold dread settle in her stomach. This was a trap. It had to be. No rebel commander would risk everything on single combat, unless he was absolutely certain of victory. "And if I refuse?" Calder asked. "Then we attack your camp tonight, kill as many of your soldiers as we can, and melt back into the forest. We'll bleed you with ambushes all the way to our stronghold. By the time you reach it, you'll have half your force left." Brennan smiled coldly. "Or you can accept our challenge and potentially end this war tonight with minimal losses." "It's a trap," Victor said quietly. "Their champion must be enhanced somehow. Magic or poison or something that gives them an unfair advantage." "Probably," Calder agreed. "But if I refuse, they'll do exactly what Brennan said. We'll lose soldiers every night and morale will collapse." He looked at his beta. "I don't have a choice. You always have a choice," Rena heard herself saying. She pushed through the soldiers to stand beside Calder. "You can refuse and find another way. You can negotiate different terms. You don't have to risk your life on their challenge." Calder's expression softened when he looked at her. "If there's a chance to end this without most of these soldiers dying, I have to take it. That's what it means to be king." "Then let someone else fight," Rena said desperately. "Victor or Tobias. Someone who isn't the most important person in the kingdom. The challenge was issued to me specifically," Calder said. "Only I can accept it." He turned back to Brennan. "I accept your terms. Single combat, winner takes all. But I choose the location and weapons." "Agreed," Brennan said. Within an hour, a combat ring had been established in the clearing, torches marking its boundaries. Soldiers from both sides watched from a respectful distance. The tension was thick as smoke, every shifter present aware that their fate hung on the outcome of this fight. Brennan's champion stepped into the ring, and Rena's blood ran cold. The man was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, with arms thick as tree trunks. But it was his eyes that made her stomach drop. They were wrong, the pupils too dilated. reflecting torchlight in an unnatural way. "He's been given something," Finian muttered beside her. "Some alchemical enhancement. Look at the veins in his neck, the way his muscles twitch. That's not natural." Calder entered the ring carrying only a sword, his armor removed to allow for greater mobility. He looked small compared to his opponent, though Rena knew he was a skilled fighter. She had seen him train in the yards, had watched him move with the deadly grace of a predator. But this opponent was enhanced beyond normal shifter strength. This was not a fair fight. The combat began without ceremony. The champion lunged forward with shocking speed for someone his size, his blade whistling through the air where Calder's head had been a heartbeat before. Calder rolled aside, came up with his own sword raised, and struck at the champion's exposed side. The blade should have cut deep. Instead, it glanced off the champion's ribs as if striking stone. Enhanced strength and durability. This was exactly the trap they had feared. The fight continued, brutal and one-sided. Calder was faster, more skilled, but every blow he landed seemed to barely affect his opponent, while every strike from the champion forced him to dodge or suffer devastating injury. Rena watched in growing horror as Calder was slowly driven back, accumulating small cuts and bruises that his opponent shrugged off without concern. This was going to end badly. The champion would wear Calder down until exhaustion made him slow, and then it would be over. She could not watch him die. Not again. Not after she had saved him on the battlefield, only to lose him here. Without conscious thought, Rena pushed through the crowd toward the combat ring. Victor tried to stop her, but she ducked under his reaching arm and ran into the circle. "Stop," she shouted. "This combat is invalid. Your champion is enhanced beyond natural ability. You're cheating." Brennan laughed from the sidelines. "There's no rule against alchemical enhancement. Your king accepted the challenge knowing we could use any means at our disposal." "Then I invoke the healer's right," Rena said, the words coming to her from old lessons she had barely remembered until this moment. Any combat can be stopped if a healer declares one fighter medically unfit to continue. Calder stared at her, blood running from a cut above his eye. "Rena, don't... You're injured," she said firmly. "Multiple lacerations, possible cracked ribs, signs of exhaustion. I declare you medically unfit to continue this combat." "The healer's right was invoked," Finian called from the crowd, his voice carrying authority. "Combat must cease immediately." Brennan's face darkened with fury. "This is an outrage. The king accepted the challenge. And a healer has ended it," Victor said, moving to stand beside Rena. "Those are the ancient laws that govern single combat. You wanted honor? Honor requires following all the rules, not just the ones that benefit you." For a tense moment, it seemed like the rebels might attack anyway. Their hands moved to weapons, and Calder's soldiers responded in kind. The clearing balanced on a knife's edge between negotiation and massacre. Then Tobias stepped forward with information that changed everything. "Commander Brennan, you should know that we captured one of your men 3 days ago. He's been very talkative about your plans. We know about the ambush points you've prepared. We know about your supply caches. And we know that your champion will die within 2 days from the alchemical enhancement he's taken. It's poisoning him even as we speak." The champion's face went pale, confirming Tobias's words. "You're sending your own men to die," Calder said quietly. "What kind of commander does that?" Brennan's composure cracked. He looked at his champion, saw the truth in the man's expression, and something in him broke. "Withdraw," he ordered his rebels. "Withdraw and regroup at the secondary location." The rebels melted back into the forest, taking their dying champion with them. Calder's soldiers erupted in cheers, but Rena felt no triumph. Only exhaustion, and the residual terror of watching Calder nearly die again. She started to walk away, but Calder caught her hand. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You saved my life. Again." "I'm starting to make a habit of it," Rena replied. And despite everything, she found herself smiling. Calder smiled back, and in that moment, with torchlight dancing across his face and gratitude shining in his amber eyes, Rena felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But perhaps the beginning of it. Chapter 6. The Rebel Stronghold. The rebel fortress emerged from morning mist like something from a nightmare, built into the face of a mountain with sheer cliffs on 3 sides and only one narrow approach. Stone walls rose 30 feet high, crowned with battlements where Rena could see archers moving. This was no hastily constructed rebel camp. This was a proper military installation that had likely stood for centuries. They chose their ground well, Victor observed grimly. We can't surround it, can't starve them out without risking our own supply lines. We'll have to take it by force. Calder studied the fortress through narrowed eyes. How many do you estimate? At least 300 rebels, Tobias said. Maybe more. They've been gathering forces here for months, planning this rebellion carefully. Rena stood beside them on the ridge overlooking the fortress, her healer's instincts already calculating the casualties such an assault would produce. Dozens would die, perhaps hundreds. Even with Calder's superior tactics and better-trained soldiers, taking a fortified position was always bloody work. There has to be another way, she said. There isn't, Calder replied, though his expression was bleak. We can't leave this stronghold intact. They'll just regroup and attack again. This ends here. Over the next 3 days, Calder's forces prepared for the assault. Siege equipment was constructed, scaling ladders assembled, strategy sessions held late into the night. Rena threw herself into preparing the medical facilities, knowing that when the attack came, she would have more wounded than she could possibly handle. On the third night, Tobias burst into the command tent where Calder, Victor, and several other commanders were planning the assault. His face was flushed with excitement. We captured a rebel scout trying to slip past our perimeter, he announced. And you'll never guess what he told us after some persuasion. The rebel leader hiding in that fortress is not just any commander. It's Tobias Greymont's brother, using the family name as cover. Rena's blood ran cold. Tobias had a brother in the rebellion? The man who had been guarding Calder, who had access to his chambers, whose face she had trusted. Calder's expression hardened. Tobias, you've been with me for 5 years. Please tell me this isn't what it looks like. Your Majesty, I swear on my life I had no idea my brother was involved, Tobias said desperately. We've been estranged for a decade. I thought he was working as a merchant in the eastern provinces. And yet he's the one coordinating attacks against me, Calder said softly, dangerously. The one who knew exactly when and where to strike. Someone has been feeding him information, Tobias. Someone with access to my schedule, my movements, my plans. It wasn't me, Tobias insisted. I would never betray you. Then explain how your brother knew about the battlefield ambush, how he knew about my private chambers, how he stayed one step ahead of us this entire campaign. Tobias opened his mouth, then closed it, clearly unable to provide an answer that would satisfy. Place him in custody, Calder ordered, and Rena saw the pain in his eyes as he said it. Under guard until we can sort this out properly. 2 soldiers moved to take Tobias away, but the commander shocked everyone by lunging forward, grabbing Rena before anyone could react, and pressing a dagger to her throat. I'm sorry, Tobias said, and he sounded genuinely regretful. But I can't let you attack that fortress. My brother is in there. The tent erupted into chaos. Soldiers drew weapons. Victor shouted orders, and Calder went absolutely still, in a way that was more terrifying than any outburst of rage. Let her go, Calder said, his voice deadly calm. Tobias, you don't want to do this. I don't, Tobias agreed. But my brother is all the family I have left. I've been helping him, yes. Feeding him information, creating opportunities for his attacks. But only to protect him, not to hurt you. I never wanted any of this. You betrayed your king, Victor spat. Your oath. Everything you claim to stand for. I know, Tobias said miserably. But blood is blood. You do the same for family. Rena forced herself to remain calm despite the blade at her throat. She could feel Tobias shaking slightly, nervous, which made him even more dangerous. A nervous man with a knife was unpredictable. Tobias, she said quietly, you don't strike me as a killer, and I don't think you want to be one. I don't, he admitted, but I will if I have to. I'm walking out of here with you as my shield and no one is going to follow. Give me 12 hours, and I'll release you unharmed once I'm safely to the fortress. You'll be shot down by your own side, Rena pointed out. Rebel archers won't know you're coming. They'll see royal soldiers approaching with a hostage and attack. That made Tobias pause. He had not thought this through, she realized. This was a desperate gambit born of panic, not planning. In that moment of hesitation, Rena acted. Her healer's training included knowledge of the human body, including vulnerable points. She drove her elbow back into Tobias's solar plexus with all her strength, then twisted away from the knife. The blade scored across her shoulder, drawing blood but missing anything vital. Before Tobias could recover, Calder was on him, moving with the deadly speed of a predator. He disarmed the commander in 2 moves and had him pinned to the ground with a sword at his throat. "Give me one reason," Calder snarled, "why I shouldn't execute you right now." "Because he can get us into that fortress," Rena said, pressing a hand to her bleeding shoulder. "He's been feeding his brother information. That means he knows the layout, the defenses, maybe even a way in that avoids the front gate." Calder looked at her, then back at Tobias. "Is that true?" Tobias sagged in defeat. "Yes. There's an old mining tunnel that connects to the fortress cellars. My brother told me about it months ago. It's how he's been moving supplies in without being noticed. And you're going to show us this tunnel," Calder said. It was not a question. "If I do, you'll kill my brother," Tobias said. "Your brother is a rebel commander who's attacked my forces, burned my cities, and sent assassins to kill me. His death is already certain. The only question is whether you help us end this quickly with minimal casualties, or whether we assault the front gate and lose hundreds of soldiers taking that fortress." Rena moved to stand beside Calder, her hand still pressed to her wounded shoulder. "Tobias, I've treated soldiers from both sides of this conflict. I've seen what siege warfare does to people. If Calder attacks that fortress head-on, rebels and loyalists will die in droves, including your brother. But if we can get inside quietly, take the leadership by surprise, maybe we can end this with less bloodshed." Tobias closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the fight had gone out of him. "I'll show you the tunnel, but I want your word that if my brother surrenders, you'll spare his life." "I can't promise that," Calder said honestly. "But I promise he'll get a fair trial and a chance to make his case. That's all I can offer." It was not what Tobias wanted, but it was more than he deserved. He nodded in resignation. The assault was planned for the following night. 30 soldiers, Calder and Victor among them, would enter through the mining tunnel, while the rest of the army staged a diversionary attack on the front gate. The goal was to take the fortress leadership alive if possible, ending the rebellion without wholesale slaughter. Rena insisted on going with the assault team despite Calder's protests. "You're injured," he pointed out, gesturing to her bandaged shoulder. "It's a shallow cut. I've treated worse," Rena countered. "And you'll need a healer with you if things go wrong." "She's right," Finian said from across the command tent. "Someone needs to be there to provide immediate medical assistance. I'm too old for crawling through mining tunnels, but Rena is young and capable." Calder looked like he wanted to argue further, but Victor interrupted. "Your Majesty, we're losing time. The diversionary attack needs to begin at midnight. We need to move." The mining tunnel was cramped, dark, and smelled of damp earth and old stone. The assault team moved through it single file, Tobias leading the way with his hands bound in front of him, Calder directly behind with a drawn sword, then the others including Rena near the rear. It took an hour to navigate the tunnel, emerging finally into a cellar filled with barrels and crates. Above them, they could hear the sounds of the fortress coming alive in response to the diversionary attack. Shouts, running feet, the clang of weapons being distributed. "The command center is on the 3rd level," Tobias whispered. "My brother will be there, coordinating the defense." They moved through the fortress like ghosts, avoiding patrols that were all focused on the front gate. When they reached the 3rd level, they found the command center guarded by only 2 rebels, who went down quickly under coordinated strikes. Calder kicked open the door to reveal a large room dominated by a map table. 5 men stood around it, and one of them looked so much like Tobias that the family resemblance was unmistakable. "Hello, brother," Tobias said quietly. The rebel commander stared at his brother in shock, then at the 30 armed soldiers filling the doorway. "You betrayed me." "I tried to protect you," Tobias corrected. "But you kept escalating, kept attacking. You forced my hand." "Surrender," Calder commanded. "Your fortress is taken. This rebellion is over." For a moment it seemed like the rebel commander might comply. Then his hand moved to a horn at his belt, and Rena realized what he intended to do. Alert his entire force, turn this from a quiet capture into a full battle within the fortress walls. She reacted on instinct, using her healing power offensively the way she had against the assassins. She reached out and touched the commander's hand, interrupting the signals between his brain and muscles. He froze, unable to move. The other rebel officers drew weapons, but Calder's soldiers were faster. Within seconds, all 5 were disarmed and restrained. That, Calder said to Rena with something like awe, was impressive. The fortress fell within the hour once its leadership was captured. Most rebels surrendered when they realized their cause was lost. A few tried to fight, and were subdued with minimal casualties. By dawn, the rebel stronghold belonged to Calder, and the Northern Rebellion was effectively broken. Calder ordered the rebel commander, Tobias's brother, and his senior officers taken alive to stand public trial in Iron Keep. Their charges would be read before the assembled court and witnesses heard on both sides. Whatever sentence was passed would be carried out under law, not in the heat of battle. Tobias, pale but unflinching, agreed to testify about how far his brother had gone. In a quiet room away from the chaos of securing prisoners and treating wounded, Calder found Rena tending to her injured shoulder. The cut had reopened during the tunnel crawl, and blood stained her bandages. "Let me," he said quietly, kneeling beside her with fresh supplies. Rena let him clean and rebandage the wound, acutely aware of how close he was, how gentle his touch. When he finished, he did not immediately pull away. "You keep saving me," he said. "From assassins, from rebels, from my own stubbornness. I don't deserve it." "Probably not," Rena agreed. "But I'm starting to think maybe that's not the point." His amber eyes searched hers. "Then what is the point?" "That we're mates," Rena said simply. "And maybe the moon goddess knew what she was doing when she chose us for each other, even if the timing was terrible and the circumstances were worse." Calder's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Does that mean you'll give me another chance?" "It means," Rena said carefully, "that I'm willing to try. One day at a time. No promises, no guarantees. Just trying." This time when he kissed her, she did not pull away. Chapter 7. The Bonding. The journey back to Iron Keep took 6 days. 6 days during which the relationship between Rena and Calder shifted from wary reconciliation to something warmer, more genuine. They rode side by side at the front of the column, talking about everything from healing techniques to kingdom politics to childhood memories. Rena learned that Calder had lost his parents to illness when he was 19, thrust into kingship before he was ready. That he loved poetry, but never had time to read it. That he had a scar on his left shoulder from falling out of a tree at age 7 while trying to rescue a trapped owl. Calder learned that Rena had always wanted children, but feared she would never have them given her solitary life. That she could sing beautifully, but was too shy to perform in front of others. That her favorite season was autumn, because the changing leaves reminded her that transformation was natural and necessary. "You're nothing like I imagined," Calder admitted one evening as they sat by the campfire after the army had bedded down for the night. "What did you imagine?" Rena asked. "That you'd hate me forever. That even if you came back, you'd keep me at arm's length, treating me with professional coldness until the mate bond drove us both mad." He stared into the flames. "I wouldn't have blamed you for that. I did hate you," Rena said honestly. "For 3 years I hated you. But hate takes energy, and I was tired of carrying that weight. When Finian told me about the prophecy, about the impossible choice you faced, I started to understand that maybe the world isn't divided into good people and bad people. Just people trying to do their best with terrible options. That's generous of you." "It's practical," Rena corrected. "Holding on to hate was destroying me. Letting it go doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It just means choosing to move forward, instead of staying trapped in the past." Calder reached across the space between them and took her hand. She let him, even laced her fingers through his. The mate bond hummed contentedly at the contact, warming her from the inside out. "When we get back to the capital," he said quietly, "I'm going to ask you formally, in front of the entire court, will you complete our mate bond and become my Luna?" Rena's heart stuttered. "That's a big question." "It is, and you don't have to answer now. But I want you to know that this time, I'm choosing you. Not duty, not prophecy, not political alliance. You. If the nobles object, they can take their objections and leave my territory. If the council pressures me to reconsider, I'll tell them exactly where they can put their concerns. Despite herself, Rena smiled. That's very romantic in a threatening sort of way. I've had 3 years to practice my romantic speeches, Calder said. Though admittedly, most of them sounded better in my head. They arrived at Ironkeep to cheering crowds and celebration. The Northern Rebellion was broken, the kingdom secured, and their Alpha King had returned victorious. Banners flew from every tower, and the scent of roasting meat drifted through the streets as the city prepared for festivities. But Calder had more immediate concerns than celebrations. He called an emergency council meeting within hours of their return, with Rena seated at his right hand where the Luna would traditionally sit. The council members noticed, their expressions ranging from curious to concerned. Thank you all for gathering on such short notice, Calder began, standing at the head of the long council table. I have several announcements to make regarding the future of this kingdom. He proceeded to outline the terms of the rebel surrender, the trials that would be held for the captured leaders, and the reforms he intended to implement in the northern territories to address the grievances that had sparked the rebellion in the first place. Then he turned to personal matters. As you're all aware, 3 years ago I rejected my true mate for political reasons. I was told that completing the mate bond would spark opposition from noble houses and potentially lead to civil war. I chose duty over personal happiness, believing I was protecting the kingdom. The council members shifted uncomfortably. Several of them had been part of those pressure campaigns 3 years ago. That decision, Calder continued, led directly to Lady Genevieve's betrayal in the Northern Rebellion. My political marriage collapsed into treason. The war I tried to prevent happened anyway. Hundreds died because I thought I knew better than the moon goddess. He turned to look at Rena, and his expression softened. I will not make that mistake again. Rena Whitmore is my true mate, chosen by forces greater than political expedience. She saved my life on the battlefield. She saved it again when assassins attacked. She has proven herself 1,000 times over as a healer, a strategist, and a woman of exceptional courage. Victor stood from his seat, and Rena tensed, expecting opposition. But the beta simply smiled and began to clap. One by one, the rest of the council joined in, until the room echoed with applause. When it quieted, Victor spoke. Your Majesty, I think I speak for the entire council when I say that we support this decision wholeheartedly. Lady Rena has already proven herself worthy of the Luna title through her actions. The kingdom will be strengthened by having her at your side. Calder looked surprised, then pleased. Thank you, Victor. Though I should note that even if you had objected, my decision would remain the same. Finian, who had been invited to attend as chief healer, raised his hand. If I may, Your Majesty, there is the matter of the bonding ceremony itself. Such events typically take months to plan properly. Then we'll do it in 3 weeks, Calder said. I've waited 3 years already. I'm not waiting months more. More discussion followed about logistics, guest lists, and ceremonial requirements. Through it all, Rena sat quietly, processing the reality of what was about to happen. She was going to become Luna, queen of all shifter territories. The woman who had fled the capital in shame would return to rule it. The irony was not lost on her. After the council meeting, as servants rushed to begin preparations, Calder pulled Rena aside into a private chamber. Was that too much? I should have consulted you before making such a public declaration. It was very much you, Rena said. Direct, decisive, slightly overwhelming. But yes, you should have asked first. I'm sorry. I got caught up in the moment, wanting to make sure everyone knew that this time was different. That this time I was choosing you publicly and irrevocably. Rena stepped closer to him, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Calder, I understand what you're trying to do. You're trying to prove that you've changed, that you won't abandon me again. But I need you to understand something. I'm choosing this too, not because you're the Alpha King, not because the mate bond demands it, but because despite everything, despite the hurt and the years apart, I still love you. It was the first time she had said those words aloud. They hung in the air between them, powerful and terrifying. Calder's arms came around her, pulling her close. I love you too. I never stopped. Even when you hated me, even when I thought I'd lost you forever, I loved you. The kiss that followed was nothing like the desperate clinging after the rebel fortress. This was slow, deliberate, a promise being made without words. Rena felt the mate bond flare golden and bright, stronger than ever now that they were both choosing it willingly. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Calder rested his forehead against hers. 3 weeks seems like an eternity. Then we'll stay busy, Rena said practically. I need to work with Finian on reorganizing the healing corps. You have trials to oversee and reforms to implement. We'll have plenty to occupy our time. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Preparations for the bonding ceremony consumed the fortress. Seamstresses created Rena's ceremonial gown, a beautiful creation of silver silk and emerald embroidery that brought out her eyes. Invitations were sent to every alpha in the kingdom, to noble houses and common pack leaders alike. And Rena worked alongside Finian to transform the kingdom's approach to healing. They established training programs for common-born healers, created supply networks to ensure even remote villages had access to medicines, and implemented standards of care that would benefit all shifters regardless of their station. You're already acting as Luna, Finian observed one afternoon as they reviewed applications from prospective healer trainees. Making decisions that will affect thousands of lives. Is that appropriate? Rena asked. We haven't completed the ceremony yet. The ceremony is just formalization of what already exists, Finian said. The moment Calder declared you his mate before the council, you became Luna in everything but name. The people already see you that way. Look. He gestured to the window. Below in the courtyard, a crowd had gathered to watch Rena and Finian work. Citizens brought their sick and injured, knowing that the future Luna personally saw to their care. Children waved when she looked down, and adults bowed respectfully. They love you, Finian said simply. You've given them something they haven't had in years. Hope that their ruler actually cares about their welfare. The night before the bonding ceremony, Rena could not sleep. She stood on the balcony of her chambers, looking out over the city and thinking about how much had changed in such a short time. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Calder standing there, looking as restless as she felt. I couldn't sleep, he admitted. Kept thinking about tomorrow. About whether I deserve this second chance. Come in, Rena said, stepping aside. They sat together by the fire, not touching but close. Comfortable silence stretched between them until Calder finally spoke. I need you to know something. If at any point tomorrow you change your mind, if you decide this is too much or too fast or just wrong, you can walk away. I won't stop you. I won't force the bond. I'm not going to change my mind, Rena said. I've thought about this constantly for weeks. I know what I'm choosing. Still, Calder insisted, I need you to know that you have that option. Always. I'll never trap you again. Rena took his hand, bringing it to her lips. Then let me give you the same assurance. If you wake up tomorrow and realize you're making a mistake, that duty really does outweigh personal desire, I'll understand. I'll leave quietly. No drama, no recriminations. That's not going to happen, Calder said firmly. But thank you for offering. They stayed like that until dawn broke, talking about everything and nothing, building the foundation of trust that had been destroyed 3 years ago. When Calder finally left to prepare for the ceremony, Rena felt more certain than ever that this was the right choice. The mate bond ceremony took place under the full moon in the fortress's great courtyard. Hundreds of shifters attended, packed shoulder to shoulder to witness their alpha king finally claim his true mate. Rena wore her silver and emerald gown, her copper hair flowing loose down her back as tradition demanded. Calder wore ceremonial armor polished to mirror brightness, a crown of woven silver on his head. When he saw Rena walking toward him between rows of witnesses, his expression transformed into something so tender, it made her eyes burn with unshed tears. The ceremony itself was ancient, words spoken in the old tongue that all shifters understood in their bones, even if they could not translate them. Vows were exchanged. Blood was mixed, a small cut on each of their palms pressed together to symbolize their bond becoming permanent and unbreakable. And when Calder marked her neck with his teeth, completing the mating bite that would brand her as his Luna, the mate bond exploded between them with such force that every shifter present felt it. A wave of golden energy radiated outward from where they stood, and the pack bond that connected all shifters to their Alpha King suddenly included Rena as well. She was no longer just herself. She was Luna, second Alpha, mother of the pack. The realization hit her with stunning clarity. Every shifter in the kingdom was now connected to her through the pack bond. She could feel them, hundreds of thousands of souls all linked together in an intricate web with her and Calder at the center. It was overwhelming and beautiful and absolutely terrifying. Calder must have sensed her momentary panic through their mate bond, because he pulled her closer, whispered in her ear, "I've got you. We'll figure this out together." And looking up into his amber eyes, feeling the love and devotion flowing through their bond, Rena believed him. Chapter 8. The Healer Queen. 6 months after the bonding ceremony, Rena stood in the newly established healing academy, watching as 30 students practiced channeling their gifts under Finian's patient instruction. The building had been completed just 2 weeks ago, funded by royal decree and staffed with the best healers from across the kingdom. It was everything she had dreamed of during her years in exile, a place where common-born shifters with healing abilities could receive proper training regardless of their family's status or ability to pay. Already, applications flooded in from villages across the territories, young Omegas and Betas, eager for the opportunity. Sometimes watching them, Rena thought of the little mountain village where she had been living when the messenger first found her. She had promised the village elder she would return within the week and never had, a broken promise that still pinched at her conscience. One of the Academy's first decrees had been to send a pair of junior healers and supplies to that region, a quiet attempt to make sure those people were no longer forgotten, even if she herself could not go back. "You've built something remarkable," Finian said, appearing at her elbow. He moved slower these days, his age finally catching up with him, but his mind remained sharp as ever. "This academy will train healers for generations. We built it together," Rena corrected. "I just provided the royal backing. You're the one who designed the curriculum and recruited the instructors." "Nonsense. This was your vision from the start," Finian smiled. "Though I must admit, I never imagined when you fled the capital 3 years ago that you'd return as Luna and transform the entire kingdom's approach to healing. The moon goddess works in mysterious ways." A messenger arrived before Rena could respond, breathless from running. "Luna Rena, you're needed at the western border. There's been an outbreak of some kind. Dozens ill, several dead already. The local healers can't identify the cause." Rena's mind immediately shifted into crisis mode. What are the symptoms? High fever, bleeding from the nose and mouth, disorientation? It spreads quickly through close contact. That sounded like poisoning, not disease. "Gather a medical team. I want 5 of our best healers ready to travel within the hour. And send word to the king that I'm heading west." "Luna, shouldn't you wait for His Majesty's permission?" the messenger asked hesitantly. "I'm Luna," Rena said firmly. "I don't need permission to respond to a medical crisis. Now go." Within 2 hours, Rena was riding west with her medical team and an escort of 20 guards. Victor had insisted on the guards despite her protests, citing security concerns. The memory of assassins and rebel attacks was still fresh. The journey took 3 days, and with each passing mile, Rena felt growing unease through her connection to the pack bond. Something was very wrong. She could sense the suffering of the afflicted, their pain and fear radiating through the invisible web that connected all shifters in the kingdom. The village where the outbreak centered was small, perhaps 200 residents, situated near the border with what had once been rebel territory. As Rena rode through the gates, the devastation became apparent. Bodies wrapped in shrouds waited for burial. Survivors moved through the streets with the hollow-eyed look of those who had lost too much. The local healer, an elderly beta named Thomas, met them with obvious relief. "Luna Rena, thank the goddess you've come. We've lost 23 already, and at least 40 more are sick. I've tried every treatment I know, but nothing works. Show me the patients," Rena said, dismounting, "and tell me everything you've observed." Thomas led her to a makeshift infirmary where the sick lay on pallets. The sight and smell hit her immediately. These people were dying, their bodies shutting down in ways that suggested toxic poisoning rather than natural illness. Rena knelt beside the nearest patient, a young woman barely conscious. She placed her hands on the woman's forehead and reached out with her healing senses, trying to identify what was wrong. What she found made her blood run cold. "It's not a disease," she said quietly. "It's poison. Someone contaminated the water supply." Thomas's face went pale. "But who would do such a thing? We're just a farming village. We have no enemies. You're on the border of former rebel territory," Rena said. "This could be retaliation. The last revenge of Tobias's brother's followers." She stood and addressed her medical team. "We're dealing with magical poisoning. Standard antidotes won't work. We need to use direct healing to purify each patient's system individually. The work was exhausting and heartbreaking. Of the 40 sick, they managed to save 28. The rest were too far gone, the poison having damaged vital organs beyond repair. Rena channeled healing energy until she could barely stand, then pushed herself to continue. Each life saved mattered. Each death felt personal. On the second day, while treating a child who had been poisoned, Rena identified the specific toxin. It was a rare substance derived from a particular mountain flower, processed through alchemical means to enhance its lethality. The same kind of enhancement that had been used on the champion during the challenge fight weeks ago. Someone with alchemical knowledge did this, she told Victor, who had arrived with reinforcements midway through the crisis. And they chose this village deliberately. It's close to water sources that feed into other settlements. If we hadn't contained it here, this could have spread across half the kingdom. Then this was a test, Victor said grimly. Someone wanted to see if this method of attack would work before deploying it on a larger scale. Rena felt sick. How many more villages were at risk? How many innocent people would die because rebels wanted revenge against Calder? We need to find out who's making this poison and stop them, she said. Can you track down the source? Already on it. We captured 3 men trying to flee the village yesterday. They're being interrogated now. By the 3rd day, the crisis had stabilized. No new cases emerged, and most of the survivors were recovering. Rena stood by the village well, watching as soldiers dumped bucket after bucket of contaminated water and prepared to dig a new well in a safer location. Luna, one of the guards, approached with a young man in chains. This is one of the prisoners. He says he has information you need to hear directly. The prisoner was barely out of his teens, his face bruised from interrogation, but his eyes defiant. You're the healer queen, he said. The one who saved the Alpha King. I am, Rena confirmed. What do you know about the poisoning? It wasn't meant to hurt anyone, he said quickly. We were just supposed to test the delivery method. Make sure the poison could be introduced into water supplies undetected. But something went wrong. It was too concentrated, too lethal. Who ordered this? The young man hesitated, fear flickering across his face. If I tell you, they'll kill me. They have people everywhere, in your fortress, in your guard, in positions you'd never suspect. I can protect you, Rena said. But only if you cooperate fully. Who gave the orders? A network, he said. Not rebels exactly, but people who benefited from the old system. Nobles who lost power when the Alpha King started his reforms. Merchants whose monopolies were broken. Even some healers who resented common-born people being trained. He looked directly at Rena. They call themselves the Restoration, and their goal is to restore the kingdom to what it was before you, and the king started changing everything. Rena felt ice spread through her chest. This was bigger than rebel remnants seeking revenge. This was organized opposition to everything she and Calder had been trying to build. How many members does the Restoration have? I don't know exactly. Maybe a few hundred across the kingdom. But they're well-funded and patient. This poisoning was just one small test. They're planning something much bigger. Victor moved closer, his expression dark. What kind of something bigger? I don't know the details. I'm too low in the organization. But I heard whispers about the autumn gathering, when all the regional alphas come to the capital. Something about making a statement that can't be ignored. The autumn gathering was in 2 months. Hundreds of important shifters would be in one place, vulnerable to exactly this kind of coordinated attack. We need to get this information to Calder immediately, Rena said. And we need to start vetting everyone with access to the fortress, the water supply, the food stores. If they have people embedded in our systems, we're all at risk. The journey back to Iron Keep was tense and hurried. Rena pushed their pace as hard as she dared, aware that every day of delay could give the Restoration time to move their plans forward. When they finally reached the capital, she went straight to Calder's chambers, still travel-stained and exhausted. He took one look at her and pulled her into his arms. I felt your exhaustion through the bond, he said quietly. How bad was it? 12 dead before we could intervene. Another 11 we couldn't save. 28 survived. Rena's voice cracked slightly. And it's going to happen again unless we stop them. She explained everything about the Restoration, about the prisoners' information, about the threat to the autumn gathering. Calder listened with growing fury. His jaw clenched so hard she could hear his teeth grinding. They poisoned a village to test their methods, he said flatly. Killed innocent people as an experiment. Yes. And they're planning something worse. Rena pulled back to look at him. Calder, we need to take this seriously. If they have people embedded in the fortress, in positions of trust, I know. He ran a hand through his hair. I'll have Victor conduct a full investigation. Anyone with suspicious connections or unexplained wealth, we'll root them out. Over the following weeks, the investigation uncovered a web of conspiracy that shocked even Rena. 3 servants in the fortress were arrested for feeding information to the Restoration. A minor noble who served on the council was found to have been embezzling funds to finance their operations. Even one of the healers at the academy, not one Rena had recruited, but one left over from the old system, was discovered to be sabotaging treatments for common-born patients. Each arrest felt like a betrayal. These were people they had trusted, people who smiled and bowed and swore loyalty, while secretly working to undermine everything Calder and Rena were building. But there was one piece of good news. Finian, using information from the captured conspirators, developed an antidote to the poison. It was complex to produce and required rare ingredients. But it worked. Rena immediately ordered it mass-produced and distributed to healers across the kingdom. We're creating protocols, she told Calder one evening as they reviewed reports in their private chambers. Testing procedures for water supplies, warning systems to detect contamination early, training for healers to recognize poisoning symptoms. If they try this again, we'll be ready. You've turned a crisis into an opportunity to strengthen our defenses, Calder observed. That's why you're such a good Luna. You don't just react to problems, you solve them in ways that make us stronger. Rena set down the report she was reading and moved to sit beside him. We make each other stronger. You handle the political and military threats. I handle the medical and social reforms. Together, we're building something worth protecting. Calder pulled her into his lap, and she went willingly, resting her head against his shoulder. I have something to tell you, she said quietly. Something I discovered a few days ago, but wanted to be certain before saying anything. What is it? I'm pregnant. She felt him go absolutely still beneath her. Finian confirmed it yesterday. About 2 months along. Silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then Calder's arms tightened around her, his face buried in her hair. We're having a child, he whispered, and his voice was thick with emotion. Moon goddess Rena. We're having a child. Are you happy? She asked, though she could feel his joy through the mate bond. I'm terrified and elated and so grateful I can barely breathe, he admitted. After everything that's happened, after all the years of waiting and fighting and nearly losing you, we get this. A family. A future. Rena tilted her head back to kiss him softly. A future we'll protect. Together. 5 months later, in the first days of spring, Rena gave birth to a healthy son, with his father's amber eyes and his mother's copper hair. Among shifter females, pregnancies rarely ran the full human 9 months. Pups born around the 7th were considered strong and healthy. Their mothers watched with the same careful joy as any who carried to term. They named him Aldrich, after Calder's father. And when Finian placed the infant in Rena's arms for the first time, she felt a completeness she had never known was possible. She was Luna, healer, mother. The woman who had fled the capital in shame had returned to transform it. And looking at her son's tiny face while Calder sat beside her with tears streaming down his cheeks, Rena understood that every moment of pain had led to this, their family, their kingdom, their happily ever after, hard won and all the more precious for it. The end.